Larkspur City Council. It is 6:30. Allison, may we have a roll call, please?
Here.
Here.
Here. Here.
Here. Thank you, Allison. And if you're able to, please stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. Thank you. Do we have any public comment that is not on the agenda tonight? If so, please come up and state your name and where you live.
Okay. Cindy Winter, 826 South Alicio in Greenbrae. I don't know whether the council is aware, county parks will increase e-bike use on the Corte Madera Creek path from Bon Air Road to College Avenue, and maybe farther. I saw it in last Sunday's IJ. Monday, I reported it to a Kentfield School District Board meeting, and when I told them about it, only one person had read the IJ, but all became concerned about safety. Yesterday, I attended the Board of Supervisors meeting, and while it's clear the supervisors will support parks, it's also clear that they and the public and even parks are worried about safety. South Alicio Drive, where I live, has a high proportion of vulnerable populations, young children and seniors. The pathway is critical for safe routes to schools and provides seniors a pleasant place to walk and get their daily exercise. At the Board of Supervisors meeting, Parks said they had made no outreach efforts at all to Larkspur. They seemed to be focused on the Mill Valley path. And I thought that was strange because there were at least 6 men there from Parks, and you think that somebody could have reached out to Larkspur. And then I have a paragraph in here. I thought that Larkspur might own a little bit of land near the entrance to the path, but our DPW director says, sadly, that's my adverb, but it's not so. Community feeling along South Alicio Drive is highly negative. This council, in my view, has a duty to confer with its concerned citizens in an attempt to devise added safety features. I put together a list of important contacts and asked that a council member be designated to conduct public outreach and report back to the full council and the wider community. And I attach my statement to the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate that. Anyone else? With the new hip replacement, congratulations.
Found out that the new hip is ballet pink. It's perfect. My name is Joan Dubkowski, and I live in Marin Park. Mobile homes comprise the largest inventory of unsubsidized affordable housing in the nation. Mobile homes are considered to be the largest source of, new language I found, naturally occurring affordable housing, which is not created by public policy or housing assistance. And I've given the book that this came from. It's new language that I really like. In reality, the people who live in mobile homes are a major sector of our workforce. Owning a mobile home is the primary way that working households attain the American dream of home ownership. Dear City Council, we truly appreciate the focus that has been brought to the topic of rent stabilization in the past few months, but it seems that mobile homes have dropped off the radar. Of the 3 ordinances that are being considered, none actually includes this community in its net. We already have mandatory mediation for mobile homes and have found it to be pretty much useless. We already have just cause eviction and are glad to see that the council is considering it for all renters. And the third issue, reporting, is not applicable to mobile home owners. Please spare Larkspur's unsubsidized, affordable, naturally occurring housing options from the market rate development. And I've put a link to the article that I think you'll find really interesting. Marin Park people? Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Joan. Thanks for being here. Anyone else?
My name is Conrad Williams, and and I own and live in a double-wide mobile home in Marin Park in Greenbrae. I have spoken to you on 2 other occasions, lamenting that there was no control over the recent rent raises. For the first 25 years of my residency, the rents have gradually increased at about 3% a year, close to the government's figure of the cost of living. Now, the family that has owned the park all this time, although its descendants now, have decided to increase rents far beyond that. Utilities and services costs have also been increasing. Lucky for those of us who are on limited incomes, the state of California has mandated care rates on fees they control. Some locally controlled, such as garbage, sewer, and water rates, have not kept pace. I mentioned last time I was here that some of these costs are regulated by you and wished you would look into regulating that low-income people, such as me, could receive care rates on these charges. The park offered those of us who could qualify a possibility to have our rents reduced through a system they support. But as you heard at the last meeting, the qualifications were impossible. I do plan to ask the park to offer those of us who would have qualified a reasonable reduction in the rent. It would be nice of you to suggest this to him, if you would. But please, look again at our plight. This community has now become a commodity. Retirement here, which seemed within reasons for so many years, is no longer possible. Please help us whatever way you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I see none. All right, well, thank you very much. We'll move on. I'm so honored. I love proclamations, especially for this person, Janice Akel. Janice, would you come on up, please? We are so going to miss you. I like to read this, please. A proclamation of the Larkspur City Council recognizing Janice Akel upon her retirement as Library Director for the City of Larkspur. Janice Akel has announced her retirement after serving as a Director of Larkspur Library from 2016 to 2019. Under Janice's thoughtful guidance, the Larkspur Library has continually expanded its program offerings, producing 231 programs in 2018 and 2019, including 171 designed for children and reaching a program audience of 10,253 participants. Wow. Janice's wide reach of connection has brought NASA scientist Ansel Adams' protege, and a number of other distinguished individuals to present at Larkspur's Little Library. Whereas ever looking to the future, Janice spearheaded efforts to add a new electronic service librarian position to the library staff to meet the growing technical and electronic demands of the patrons and to be proactive in planning for future needs. And Janice's enthusiasm and wisdoms were instrumental in helping advance the efforts to establish a new Larkspur library facility. And Janice's dedication to the Larkspur Library has created a community resource that meets and exceeds our community's educational, recreational, and informational needs and improve the quality of life of Larkspur's residents. That you have. As described by colleagues, the closest thing we have to a magic wand. Janice has elevated us all during her time at the Larkspur Library, including the performance of library staff, the appearance and functionality of the library, and the discussion at every meeting she has attended, and her shining example has elevated the intelligence, level of commitment, and joy of all those who serve beside her. I, Ann Morrison, Mayor of the City of Larkspur, express the gratitude of the City Council to Janice Akel for her service and leadership of the Larkspur Library, and further offer our congratulations and best wishes on the occasion of her retirement. We are so happy that you were part of the Larkspur Library as the years you were.
I'm most honored, and are you sure it's me?
It is so you, girlfriend.
I wanted to express my gratitude to the council and to Dan for giving me the role of Library Director here and the opportunity to come to Larkspur, which I've enjoyed very much. And I love libraries, as I keep telling you every time I've come before the council. And I get so much pleasure from seeing different people coming into the library, whether it be for educational purposes or social purposes or general reading. There's just a whole myriad of reasons why people come. And to see the expanded role that we play in the community really warms me, and I'm only sorry that I'm unable to stay on any longer. I want to thank each and every one of you, Dan, you included, who put up with my ideas every now and then when I come through your door with something. And I hope that you continue to support the library to be the asset that it is and to help make this something that helps Larkspur thrive and remain a socially healthy community. I would also like to thank all the support groups, the Friends of the Library, the LLC, the Board of Trustees, the Foundation, all the groups who are comprised of citizens who think that the library is worthwhile and plays an active role. I'll just say one thing. I'm very thrilled to get the proclamation. I'm going to go and show it to my grandson, who's 4, and who recently went with his father to Ireland over the summer. He has an Irish mother. And my son took him to Trinity College, into the great hall and the great library there. And I don't know if any of you have visited this, but it's a pretty impressive place. And my son said to my grandson, so what do you think of this library? And my grandson turned to his dad and said, Nana's library's better.
Oh, yes,
So,
it is. Love
I will
it.
show her this, and thank you very, very much.
Well,
I hope, because I'll be coming back to visit the children, I'll
Good.
see you all too.
well, and thank you. Your leadership has
Thank you.
been just incredible, Janice. What a different library. And you've re-motivated the Friends of the Library and the directors and the Larkspur Library Community Foundation. It's been...
It's a very vibrant place now.
Yes.
It's full of all sorts of people from the community at all times of the day. And our outreach to places like the TAM are simply thriving, and we hope that work will continue and work with other people in the community and the schools as
Wow.
well. So thank you very much.
Well, and is it true you're off to Prague to
Yes.
live? Oh, lucky you.
In about 10 days.
Oh,
Well,
so
look at
excited.
you.
I know. I need to give you a hug.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So proud of you. I'm excited for you. To your grandchildren.
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to let you know, I haven't had a chance to figure out with Janice the right 2 hours, but we're going to try to find 2 hours, probably on her last day next week, where she'll stay still and not keep trying to fix things in the library, and folks can come by and wish her well and talk to her about
What
her
a
service
great
here.
idea.
So,
Super, Dan.
And she's going to be here all next week. So.
Good, 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 good. All right, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the approval of the consent calendar. Anybody from the council want to remove something from the consent calendar?
I'd like to take 4.6, please.
4.6. Okay, that's the dedication and acceptance of park facilities and landscape improvements at Neighborhood Park. And
Anybody, you want to take anything?
so, would you like to
Yes,
discuss that?
I would just like to pull it out for a very quick reference to let this not go without public recognition, that our relationship and work with the city and the owners of Serenity Apartments over the last several years has really resulted in a very beneficial and lovely contribution to that area of the neighborhood. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of our partnership with Serenity on ownership of the apartment complex there to really upgrade the public facilities that are available for all of us, including a nice new park area, a new sign, and a new playground structure that came in a couple years ago. So I didn't want it to go under the consent calendar and unknown to everybody. But the latest contribution comes to almost $10,000, which is a really terrific way in which the community, all of us are benefiting from that relationship. So
Great.
that's all I wanted to
appreciate
do.
you pulling that. Thank you. Thank you for that recognition. All right, we'll bring that back, and I'm going to go ahead and now open it to the public. Anybody from the public have any comments about the consent calendar? All right, I see none. I'll bring it back to the council. May I have a motion?
Madam Mayor, I'll move the balance and include Councilmember Way's acknowledgement in item 4.6.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Any nays? I see none. All right, we'll move on. We'll move on to the city manager's report. Dan Schwartz.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I have one item that I've asked Public Works Director Julian Skinner to do a very brief update about the bridge project. So my item is just to let the council and the community know we had an item about our challenges with the overflow of Redwood High School parking into the neighborhoods. Parents this week received an email from the principal, actually from the vice principal, informing them that we're launching the program. Our letters are now out to the affected property owners, explaining the program in more detail to them, and so word is getting out. And we haven't yet gone to full implementation, and as we talked about, we will roll this out gently. We'll make sure people understand it's a program and that it exists before we reach the punitive phase. So that's starting to happen. That'll be happening into the early part of October, and then it'll be, I think, a fully robust program at that point. And then with that, we've been getting questions about what's permanent, what's not out around the bridge. My quick response to folks is if it's made of wood, it's not staying. If it's not made of wood, it's probably staying. But I thought it would be a good idea to have the expert come and give you a real quick explanation. So I'm going to ask Julian Skinner to just come up. He's brought a couple photos to show you.
Good evening. So we have a couple of recent photos. Actually, I think these were taken this morning. So this is an overview of the Bon Air Bridge. Hillview is on the left of this slide, and then South Alicio is on the right. So you're driving towards the hospital from left to right in this photo. And so for about the first year of this project, I had to keep promising people we were actually building a bridge because everything was underwater and you couldn't see anything. Now we're finally out of the water, but because of the rails on the bridge, it's still kind of hard to see what's going on. And I think the most visible thing is these wooden platforms that are on either side of the bridge. And so starting at the very top, so the north end of the bridge, kind of under the power lines, is a temporary wooden trestle. So this was one of the first construction items. That's a temporary structure. There are steel piles driven into the creek, and then there's big timbers on top, and that's what the crane is moving back and forth on as it's been building the bridge over the last year and a half. That goes away. That's temporary. It's for construction only. And if all goes according to plan, it will go away December of this year or January of next year when they're finished on the north half of the new bridge, which, moving down the photo, is the next thing in sequence. What you see there is there are a line of 3 concrete members that are spanning the bridge. Those are the bridge girders that will support the bridge deck. The bridge deck, the driving surface, will be poured about a month from now on top of those girders, and then they'll be working after that to get everything ready to flop traffic over to that new half of the bridge, hopefully again in that late December of this year, early January of next year timeframe. And then the next item moving down the slide is what's left of the old bridge. They did demolish the north portion of the old bridge to make way for the new bridge construction. But this is what everybody's driving on today, the last remnants of the existing bridge. And then the newest feature out there is the south trestle. So just like we had a trestle temporary bridge on the north side of the new bridge, we now have built or are still building one on the south side. And so that's the latest construction out there, is another wooden trestle on the south side of the bridge. And so they will use this to demolish the rest of the existing bridge once they've got traffic moved over to the new northern half. And then they'll also use it as a platform to start drilling the piles in the creek for the new southern half of the bridge. So the new part you see out there is half of the new bridge. Again, we're building this in two halves so we can keep traffic across the bridge. And then just one other slide. This is kind of looking at it from a different angle. This is, again, driving from Magnolia towards the hospital. So again, you can see as these things lay out, you've got the two trestles on either side. And then the remnants of the existing bridge that everybody's driving over, and then to the left, kind of sandwiched there, is the new bridge, or you see the line of the three girders that will support the northern half of the new bridge.
Thank you so much. It's just been such an incredible process for us to watch, and I see you out there all the time with your hard hat. But thank you so much for the updated photos. Appreciate it.
And Julian will be coming back pretty soon here to do a full presentation on the status of the bridge and what you can expect in 2020 on the bridge work. And then also we'll be doing a Measure B update relatively soon for the council as well. So you'll be hearing a lot from him in coming meetings.
Great. Well, please do.
Julian, I know the staging process is very specific. So I remember a few months ago when there was an opportunity to do some things on that intersection while they were letting things within the water do something different. It's too complicated to explain all that. But then that stopped because they were able to go back into the water area. What's happening at the intersection there?
So the intersection of Magnolia and Bon Air?
And Bon Air, yes.
So they did actually do some weekend work a couple of months ago.
Exactly.
Where they got the big concrete barriers out of the way. Again, the complication with that intersection was, again, it's not only a bridge project. We're redoing these signals. We're reconstructing these streets. We're digging down 14 inches and putting new asphalt. So it was very intensive work, and so we had to close that intersection for the weekend because we couldn't get traffic through when we did that. Having said that, most of that work at that location is complete. There are still some orange cones and barrels out there because the Bon Air Road itself is not complete. And so for the intersection to work properly, Bon Air would have to be in its full configuration. And right now only half of it is open. So that's why there are still a lot of orange cones out there. The crosswalks are all open now. But it is still an active construction zone, and so we have a lot of those orange cones, barrels, and barricades up for safety reasons. We're working now on the new signals are all up, but they're not running in automated mode at the moment. They're still in fixed time, so the next step at that intersection is getting the signals automated so they'll pick up the traffic the way the traffic is laid out now, and that signal will work a lot more efficiently. But you'll see that intersection will be in various stages, mainly because of the way that Bon Air Road has been split into two halves. They can't finish it until they finish Bon Air Road itself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Dan, anything else?
That's all I have for you tonight.
Great. Thank you. I'll bring it to the council. Council members' reports or comments. Anybody? No, you please go ahead, Kevin.
Just take a minute to report that today, all day pretty much, I spent with colleagues from communities in Marin and elsewhere for MCE Clean Energy's annual board retreat, which we did in Richmond for the second year in a row. This is an opportunity for members of the board and staff to get together and kind of look past and look back to the past to see how things have gone in the previous year, look forward to the coming year, identify issues and challenges that we're going to need to address going forward. We were happy to have representatives from some other agencies there, including a representative from the governor's office who was there to talk about some new legislation that is encouraging expanding infrastructure for electric vehicles. There was one of the commissioners from the California Public Utility Commission who was there for a period of time talking about primarily proposed regulatory changes that could have a significant and not particularly helpful effect on the way in which we account for our renewable energy procurement. The good news is that the MC is in good financial shape, primarily because of the growth it has experienced over the last couple of years in Contra Costa County and elsewhere. Had a very beneficial impact on the organization's revenues. We received the annual auditor's report today, and we got a complete bill of good health, no qualifications with respect to any aspect of our financial conditions or accounting practices. But as I said, it's not all good news. We do have a number of challenges that we're going to be facing in the coming year that are going to be difficult. I mentioned some of the regulatory issues that we continue to face, changes with the CPUC and other regulatory agencies that are difficult to understand sometimes and present challenges in our ability to manage and run our business. And also issues coming out of market conditions driven in part by PG&E's bankruptcy and uncertainties that are created by that, but also some of the other activities of the investor-owned utilities, for example, down in San Diego, which has announced tentatively plans to get out of the market for selling power and just go to a pure wires and transmission company. So some of those changes create uncertainty. Uncertainty creates risk, and those are not always easy things to manage. But the bottom line is, it was a very good day, good opportunity to meet colleagues from around Northern California that are committed to the success of the community choice aggregation movement. That's it.
Thanks, Kevin. Catherine?
Thanks, Kevin. So I've been a little busy. I wanted to fill the council in on the community on a couple of things. On Thursday, I attended the Disaster Council, the DC3, the county's Disaster Council, because I represent the Marin mayors and council members, and there was an update on what the county is doing to help prepare for power shutoffs by PG&E. And they've coming together with a continuity of operations plan, which is called a COOP, in which the county is looking at their 9 essential services and departments that they really want to figure out how to get up and running when the power goes out. I asked if there's plans for helping the cities and towns, and that discussion hadn't happened yet, apparently, that they're going to work on the county aspect of it first, but I think we're going to have to keep our eye on that. If everybody doesn't know, PG&E is planning on, if the wildfire risk gets too high in certain areas, shutting the power off. You can now register your zip code, which ours is 94939, and you can get specific text whether it's going to affect your area. So please, everybody, do that. Second thing is, I spent all day yesterday at the Marin VOAD disaster meeting. This is my disaster week. So what a VOAD is volunteer organizations active in disaster. It's all the nonprofits, it's all the churches, it's Meals on Wheels, it's all the different services that are offered to our community and what their role will be in a disaster and to prepare in advance. So the Marin VOAD has been dormant for a number of years, but yesterday there were a good 200 people who had been invited from all the churches, from all of the nonprofits, to really learn what emergency services are and what their role is. So if you are in a church community or a synagogue, or you're affiliated with any of these villages, they're very much welcome to attend the Marin VOAD, and it's online, marinvoad.org, so that they can participate within your neighborhood and be prepared to serve not only your neighbors and your neighborhood, but also to serve their own clients after a disaster. I was really impressed with how good the turnout was. And lastly, when Councilmember Himmler was out of town, I got the great opportunity to be his alternate to the Ross Valley Paramedic Authority, and that was last week. And one of our battalion chiefs has a really great relationship with some Haitian expats who live here in Green Bay, and we were able to donate our old retired ambulance to go, a 2008 Ford ambulance that was in excess to be donated to Haiti. And these guys were terrific. They really gave a great presentation about how surplus school buses and ambulances and other things from the United States and elsewhere are refabricated there in Haiti and really used a lot. But that also meant Ross Valley Paramedic Authority bought a fabulous new medic, number 18, and they gave us a tour of that. So that's sort of my scoop.
It's a good one. Thank you, Catherine. Anyone else? Okay, Larry?
Well, with all this disaster stuff, it is because this is FEMA's National Preparedness Month, right? Yeah. I'm just here to report out on a committee that just got disbanded with the Marin County Council of Mayors and Councilmembers. And it was to study for the second time pensions and post-employment benefits. I was the chair of that, and Councilmember Haroff was a member of that committee, as was City Manager Dan Swartz. So Larkspur had quite a representation on that. We just published our report on Friday, and it is now available on the MCCMC's website at mccmc.org. Just go to the section on committees, and at the bottom of the page is pensions and OPEBs, and you'll see the report, actually both reports in that section. The key takeaway from that, as I was quoted in the Marin IJ a couple days ago, is that this whole problem, started 20 years ago, and we are where we are right now. There's nothing we can do about it to change the past. This whole problem is not about to vilify public employees and their benefits, and there's no intention of taking away benefits that are already earned. The primary recommendations come about in terms of restructuring your current obligations to public employee retirement systems, or to find ways to increase your revenues or to reduce your expenses. So in terms of the first thing that I mentioned about restructuring debt, we'll have that conversation a little bit later this evening.
Yeah. Larry, thanks for all your effort and time in that report. It's pretty amazing. So thank you for that. Dan?
Madam Mayor, I have nothing to report.
Okay. I do. I'll be quick. It's the Larkspur Chamber of Commerce. We have a new executive director, Julie Servetto, who will come and give a report soon. You guys can all meet her. They are preparing for the 2020 wine stroll, so they're on top of that. We have a Spirit of Marin luncheon, which is September the 27th at St. Vincent's from 11:30 to 1:30, so hopefully the council members can make that. Super. We also have a Business Citizen of the Year Award mixer, and that's October the 15th from 5 to 7 at Perry's Restaurant. And we are also starting to work on the North Magnolia Wreath Walk, which is November the 16th. They're also looking for new board members, so for those that want to get involved with the Larkspur Chamber of Commerce, please look them up. And they're also looking for new chamber members. All right, so thank you.
Madam Mayor, I
Yes.
just want to mention on the point about new board members, I am, as of 2 weeks ago, I think, now on the board.
Fantastic.
So
That's great.
It's going to be elevating our commitment to helping out the chamber and making them more successful, I think.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Kevin. All right, with that, we'll move on to public hearing. 7.1, introduce first reading of an ordinance 1041, amending Title V, Business Licenses and Regulations of the Larkspur Municipal Code to add new chapters 5.42, Prohibiting Commercial Cannabis Activity. May we have a staff report, please? Hi, Neil.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Morrison and council members. To begin tonight, I will kind of keep it short in terms of the background of the past propositions and legislative history, and focus on the more recent legislation. In 2017, the legislature passed and the governor signed Bill SB 94, the Medicinal and Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. And this bill essentially consolidated and provided clarity about state regulations and permitting for both medicinal and adult use commercial cannabis businesses. This legislation allows some local discretion to prohibit or permit various activities made legal by their enactment. And however, the legislation and the state licensing procedures that were coming online created a situation wherein local agencies had to provide clarity as to how they do or do not regulate various types of businesses involving cannabis. So in the fall of 2017, the City Council held study sessions on the various issues and dealing with both commercial cannabis and personal cultivation. And ultimately, the council adopted interim ordinances temporarily prohibiting medical and non-medical cannabis-related businesses for a period of 2 years. The intent at that time was to provide time to allow for deeper analysis for any consideration of zoning amendments or other regulations to allow this new industry within Larkspur. And at the time, the council did adopt permanent regulations allowing for personal cultivation indoors and also for deliveries of both medical and recreational cannabis into the city from licensed commercial or medical dispensaries located outside Larkspur. Now, the citizens of Marin and Larkspur largely voted in favor of decriminalization and legalization of both medical and adult use marijuana, suggesting support for its presence in Larkspur. However, the cannabis industry is comprised of a variety of types of businesses, cultivation, processing, warehousing, retail sales, and delivery, and each of these presents a variety of potential operational issues relative to visibility, security, and access for minors. And the community has long expressed concern with having these products in close proximity to parks and schools. And when we look at restricting locations according to this proximity, it is difficult. There are very limited locations where cannabis industry could operate. Now, we did a recent survey, and most Marin communities continue to generally prohibit commercial uses and are continuing to explore best practices and standards to appropriately regulate the industry. Currently, no other agencies in Marin permit storefront dispensaries of any type, except for the town of Larkspur recently adopted a new permanent ordinance allowing for up to 2 dispensaries and storefront for medical only.
And you meant Fairfax, right?
Fairfax, excuse
Yeah,
me.
Thank you.
So if Fairfax. If Larkspur were to allow such uses, it would have to determine which zones, if any, would be appropriate and how we would regulate them. Additionally, we are a member of the Central Marin Police Authority, which also serves the communities of San Anselmo and Corte Madera. And conferring with CMPA, we do recognize there would be benefits for them in terms of working with these entities to assure there's continuity enforcement and standards if such uses are permitted. The city continues to allow delivery of medical and non-medical cannabis to residents, and neither the staff nor the council that we're aware of has received requests to expand the presence of commercial cannabis activity in the city to include physical stores. It does appear for the time being that continuing to allow deliveries into Larkspur is meeting the needs of the residents. And as well, we have not received any complaints regarding deliveries or any issues regarding personal grow indoors as well in this 2 years' time. So now if that changes in the future, we can return to the council and receive direction about how to respond. But our recommendation at this time is to maintain the status quo by continuing to prohibit commercial cannabis activity except for deliveries as mentioned. So we have worked with the city attorney, and we're proposing amendments to Title V, Business Licenses and Regulations, to add a new chapter prohibiting commercial cannabis activity. And that is attached, Ordinance 1041. And again, this does not preclude the City Council from reconsidering the matter in the future. This just maintains local control for the time being and allows for future reconsiderations if that's the direction of the council at a future time. So with that, we would recommend the council hear the staff report, open public hearing, and move to waive first reading and introduce Ordinance 1041, prohibiting commercial cannabis activity within the city of Larkspur, except for deliveries into Larkspur, as noted. The ordinance would return for second reading and adoption on October 2nd, establishing these regulations. So do you have any questions of staff?
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for the update and report. I have a quick one for Neil. Neil, you mentioned that we do have some areas that we could open a dispensary store. Where would that area be?
It's largely limited to, if you take out schools, it's a bit larger, and I did not include those maps here. But there's some limited areas along Sir Francis Drake and the Bon Air area, and on the far side of the freeway and around Larkspur Landing. And now if you take out parks as well, your areas become much more limited.
Okay.
In locations.
Easiest way to sort of guess where it is without us, and apologize, we didn't realize you'd want to see the maps tonight.
Just curious.
If they're selling cigarettes, they're probably in the same zone because we applied the same buffers that the city's used in the past for that. So that might give you a rough idea of locations that are probably outside of our typical buffer zone that you've established in the past for those types of sales.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Larry?
Yeah, as a follow-up question, what's your radius? Because the state under Prop 64 was like 600 feet.
Yeah, that's using that radius. That's based
I
on
think
that
ours
same.
was actually a little bigger. Now I got to I'll try to look it up while we're talking. I think you as a council asked for a larger radius.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to check
I'll
on.
look up.
Yeah,
the
we can
previous
look up, provide you those maps.
Well, I was at a half mile, so.
And that may have been, we may have also provided that comparison as well.
Okay, Catherine?
So I'm not really familiar with delivery services, but if a delivery service delivers to a resident of Larkspur or Green Bay, do they need a business license to deliver? And do we know?
Technically, yes.
Technically, they do. Okay.
But we don't have a real way of enforcing that.
Are there ways that that's enforced in jurisdictions? Because it seems a little under the radar, so I mean.
No.
Okay.
Not really. I mean, that's like the same thing. Technically, FedEx ought to be pulling a business license, and UPS ought to be pulling a business license. And
So we're not accruing any financial benefit from a delivery? As far as,
no, and even if we were, you're talking about a pretty nominal amount of money.
and last thing about delivery, where does the tax that happens with cannabis, because I know there's a lot of taxes, if it's a delivery, where does that tax revenue go? To which jurisdiction?
Point of sale.
Point of sale. So if the person.
That's California.
Okay, so if they're from Vallejo, let's say, or San Rafael. Goes to Vallejo. Okay, didn't know that.
Great. Anyone else? Any other council member have questions? All right, I see none. I will go ahead and open to the public. Anybody from the public like to make a comment about Neil's report? Hi. Please state your name and address, please.
Sure. My name is Scott Candell, address 71 Via Chaparro. I just want to give some input on this, and Sky, you can, I'm going to ask maybe he can either agree or disagree with the state of the law right now. The law has changed since the moratorium was passed. The state of the law currently is that in order to have any type of cannabis business, you have to have a license from the state of California. The state of California will not issue a license without verifying permission from the local government. So if I were to apply for, the reason we had the moratorium originally was before the laws were passed, there were people who would sneak into a jurisdiction, open up, And then the jurisdiction would pass a ban or a moratorium, and they would say, well, I'm grandfathered in because I was here before you had your moratorium. And then it was a problem getting them out. So everybody passed these moratoriums to prevent that. The law has changed since then. So right now, that's not required. Is when the moratorium expires, nobody will be able to open in Larkspur. If you don't pass this, they still won't be able to open in Larkspur because they won't be able to get a license, because if they apply for a license, what's going to happen is the state will call the city manager and say, hey, ABC Corp is applying for a license in Larkspur. Did you give them permission? The city manager would say no. They don't get permission. They can't open. They would get arrested. The reason I am saying all this is because it's being presented as you need to pass this to keep the status quo. That's not true. The status quo will stay even if this is not passed. And what I am suggesting is that 2 years ago, when the moratorium was passed, it was so there could be in-depth discussion about how do we do this? Is there a way to do this right? Is there a way that we can raise revenues for the city, protect our community, our children, our character, all these things, and give access to the people who voted 70% that they wanted this? Is there some way that we can do this? And my understanding is that really hasn't happened yet. And I would like to point out that over the next couple of months, there will be 2 new council members joining the council who may want to weigh in on this in order to decide what's going to be happening in the future of Larkspur. So with all that said, what I am requesting is that instead of passing this, we move this over and we just pass it until the new council sits. And then we can have a discussion with our community. And if the community decides this is not what they want, so be it. But I think that we should have that discussion with the community, and we should have an opportunity to weigh in on it.
Great.
Thank you for your
Thanks,
time.
Scott.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Anyone else?
Much taller than me. Jean Friedel, 358 Larkspur Plaza Drive. I just want to add a couple things to the discussion. Some facts. While the taxing ability is, there's no comprehensive tracking of that. Currently, it stands at Berkeley, the city of Berkeley earned $1.2 million in tax revenue from the sale of cannabis. San Jose, $13 million. Richmond, just under $1 million. Oakland at $13.7 million. Monterey at $11.3 million. Those communities use those funds to fund low-income loans, additional nursing and police officers, veteran services, and in the case of Monterey, they use their money for rainy day funds. The 2 points I want to make are, there's an item in the staff report that the city, Dan and Neil prepared, and there's a line in there that says, rather than affect the status quo, that we move to continue the moratorium and pass it. And I would say just because you haven't heard from the city doesn't mean that the status quo is the same. Sitting in council meetings, the only way that someone can come up and bring something to your attention is public comment not on the agenda. And at that point, you can't address it, discuss it, vote on it, or have any discussion on it. So my concern would be that what has been done to allow the community to voice their concerns and their support of this industry, that Larkspur is denying. And having been involved in the LLCCF and working very closely with a lot of you, I would highly recommend that a city with $50 million in unfunded capital improvement projects, including the safety of this building, not shut off revenue streams that might help the city.
Sorry, thank you. Neil, a question to you. I don't know where I can find it in the report, but if we go ahead and add this new chapter 5.42, you could. I do remember reading that it could be changed and rediscussed.
As with any ordinance, one of the reasons of the interim ordinance at the time is because of the state law had already passed, so there's urgency to have a solution. Now, we're adopting an ordinance which just establishes one very direct chapter, and that in the future, if the council decides to amend, retract that chapter, revise, adopt zoning regulations that allow certain uses in certain locations with certain permitting, then that could be a different,
Discussed.
it would be a new process, but
Okay.
this doesn't preclude the council from taking any future action on that.
Great. All right. Thank you, Neil.
Can I ask you, can you clarify that zoning regulations that would need to change? I don't think I understand that. We would actually have to rezone an area for commercial cannabis sales? Or we would be able,
Or-
it would only be zoned in a commercial area to begin with?
Well, you might amend the zoning of certain areas to specify certain types of cannabis uses and how they might be permitted or regulated within those zones.
So the zone that you mentioned, well, we talked about East Greenbrae area off of Highway 101, and then you had mentioned something off of Bon Air Road. Would that be zoned currently for this type of retail sale, or would we have to rezone that?
Well, it kind of just depends upon the approach. What is it you want to achieve, and what are the particular issues or regulations you want to address? Because there are uses that are more industrial in character, and then there are uses that are more storefront in character.
I see. Okay.
And so if it's more of a storefront accessible, you might look at areas that are either office or retail, commercial, versus industrial zone, which might be a place that you allow warehousing, processing, or something of that sort. So it's kind of matching the nature of the commercial use with that district, and then looking at any other concerns of proximity
I see.
to schools, security, visibility, things like that. For instance, some communities are allowing, while sort of small warehousing and delivery tends to be considered an industrial type of use, some communities are allowing it within office complexes, because office is not really that vibrant, and it's a way to make those areas more useful as well. So
Okay, thanks.
I don't know.
To add on to that, because we found the maps, so I'm going to have them printed out for you. And we did run the maps as 600-foot buffers to show you the state law. You'll recall, or you may not, the staff had suggested we might want to explore permitting deliveries services to have their offices in Larkspur, their point of sale in Larkspur. And we had suggested that in casual conversation, we had people say proximity to the hospital might be of interest to some members of the community. That's an example of an area where we would have to look at some of the zoning, because it doesn't exactly match up right now. But that's doable if we want to go down that path. And there are some of these buffer questions that have to be looked at in that context, if that were something that ultimately was of interest to the council.
Larry has a question.
So to that point, if Marin General decided to permit sale of marijuana for medicinal purposes, we couldn't control it anyway because they're not within our jurisdiction.
If the hospital itself, they're not in Larkspur, so they could do.
That's correct.
Yeah, they could do whatever the county would permit them to do. But we've heard from time to time, because so many of the offices on Alicio in particular are affiliated in some way, shape, or form with the hospital. People have asked about medical marijuana and the possibility of its being located close to the hospital.
Right.
So we had raised that for you as a possible discussion point a couple of years ago.
Thank you.
Catherine, anything else?
Just one last question about the 600-foot buffer zone. I'm trying to recall if that's the law, was in the proposition, or is that our policy decision? And the second part of that is, if it's out of our jurisdiction, but within 600 feet of a school or a daycare center, out of our jurisdiction, where does that fall into it? So for instance,
So I'm going to make a suggestion that
All right.
that
Am I getting too in the weeds?
Well, I think if you want to have these discussions, you should actually postpone this item and direct us to bring you a different agenda item, because I don't know that's fair to the public to get too far into a discussion of this. I think if you now feel you want to have this more robust conversation now, we should bring you an agenda item that's properly designed to both facilitate your conversation and signal to the public that this is the conversation you want to have.
Understood.
Kevin? I do, but do you have a?
I have a question, but I can wait.
Okay, let's wait, because I think there's some more people that like to. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Come on up. Anybody else, please?
James Holmes, Larkspur. It might be worthwhile to know whether the city attorney agrees with the previously expressed legal opinion that it is not necessary to have this ordinance in order to maintain the status quo. It might be worthwhile to know that. That aside, for 4 reasons, I think that the staff proposal is worthwhile at this time. First, I think it appears to be what the citizens want. The last time this came up for consideration, the room was filled with people, primarily young parents, arguing against having retail dispensaries and arguing in favor of banning them. Number 2, there is a paucity of places to have it. I did bring the map here, so I mean, I can give it to you if you would like. But the bottom line is, it seems to me that we really don't, unlike many cities, we really don't have a large industrial area or a large commercial area apart from residences. Almost all of these areas have residences in the vicinity, including, for example, the mobile home parks. And I would not want to impose this kind of use on somebody else if I wouldn't want it in my area. I think that's simple social justice. I think it's hard to tell whether the costs would outweigh the benefits, but I am aware, I've heard staff say many times that enforcement of existing requirements is already a challenge, and I would be hesitant to add to that challenge. And finally, a recent article in the Independent Journal suggests that there may be more legal obstacles to allowing dispensaries than one might suppose. It says the ruling, the California Supreme Court ruling said the ruling would force the 2/3 of California cities that don't allow marijuana dispensaries to conduct more rigorous environmental reviews if they eventually consider allowing such businesses. So for all of these reasons, I would think that at the present time, this proposal would be the wisest course. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Hello.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Fernandez. I work with Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships. The city and the council has been really supportive of the work that we do around underage drinking and drug use prevention since we started about 8 years ago as Twin Cities Coalition for Healthy Youth. And I just wanted to draw a couple things to our attention about kind of where we stand today in areas that affect youth and public health that are around this issue. The first is that, and also I just want to thank you guys for the staff report. The way that I read it and what I thought the discussion was going to be tonight is pretty much that this city is aligning itself with most of the other jurisdictions in Marin and taking a cautious approach at this stage of legalization. I want to draw attention to, first of all, the U.S. Surgeon General's report that came out less than 3 weeks ago. It's the first it's the first marijuana advisory since 1982. And the reason that office came out with an advisory at this point in time is because they're seeing alarming use amongst vulnerable populations and marijuana being, I wouldn't say prescribed, but recommended to pregnant women. And also they're seeing an increase in youth use. And the way he put it is, it's the perception of harm is going way down, and at the same time, the actual potential risk and harm is going way up because of the THC levels. So I think you've all heard about this. I don't want to reiterate it, but from 40, 50 years ago, it was 2% THC. Now we're looking at the plant 20 to 30% THC and then concentrates up to 99% THC. And that's not something that we have really a lot of data on. and that we know the long-term impact. I know I'm going to be running out of time, so I'll make this quick. And then just another thing a little bit more locally. Last week, Marin County Office of Education, they put together an event in about a week for community education. It was around cannabis and vaping. And the reason they did this is because there was 6 middle school students who ate edibles at school. And emergency services had to be called. And fortunately, everybody was okay. But this isn't something that, they're seeing more cannabis on campuses. That's really alarming. It wasn't the only thing. In the first couple weeks of school, there was a number of instances, and nearly a half dozen, actually I think over a half a dozen in the first couple weeks of school, referrals to Marin County Youth Court for youth use of cannabis at schools. So that's also in the middle of what on Monday was the 7th person that actually died from vaping cannabis products. It's nicotine, both nicotine and THC vaping products have been implicated in these deaths and these pulmonary diseases. And we're at a point in legalization where there's not a lot of regulation. We don't know what's going on. The FDA isn't overseeing it, and they might approve a substance for ingesting like vitamin E or something like that, but they don't know the impact on the lungs. And so again, I just want to thank the city and all of you for just aligning yourself with the rest of the county and taking a really cautious approach while we figure out a lot of these uncertainties that can have a serious, serious public health impact. Thank you.
Appreciate, and thank you for your time on the coalition. It's needed. Anyone else? All right, I see none. I'll close the public comment, and I'll bring it back to the dais. Any questions from the council members? Kevin?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Attorney if he could maybe provide some comments in response to the characterization of the current state of the law.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think that is an accurate description of the law, but I think from the municipal law side of things, there are a couple of comments that I would add. It is the case that under state law, a cannabis business that wishes to open has to obtain a permit from the state. The state regulatory agency will make a determination about whether or not the type of business that has been applied for is permitted in the community in which they're seeking the permit. From our perspective, though, it is advisable for cities to have clear statements in the law about what is and is not allowed. And so in the absence of a provision in the municipal code that clearly states what is and isn't allowed, we would be able to inform the Bureau of Cannabis Control that we have permissive zoning and that the business in question is not expressly allowed, but we wouldn't have a provision in the municipal code that directly says that the business is allowed or not allowed. Similarly, so another way to explain that is that's part of the reason that we recommended the moratorium in the first place, was so that in the period in which we wanted to look at this, we would at least have an ordinance in place to show the state that, in fact, during the moratorium period, these businesses were not going to be permitted. I guess what I would also say about it is, you'll probably remember this once I say it, that the BCC issued regulations that would have allowed delivery to occur throughout the state, even in communities where the city council had adopted an ordinance prohibiting deliveries. I believe that coalition of cities are challenging that, but I think it suggests that the view of the state about whether or not it will honor state local rules is still a little bit uncertain as everybody tries to figure out what the final regulatory playing field is going to be for this new arena. And so I think that if the council is interested in having a policy along the lines of the one that the staff is recommending, it would be appropriate to go ahead and adopt the ordinance to have a clear statement about that in the municipal code. At the same time, as Neil said, this is a council-adopted policy. It can be amended by the council at any time. If there is a view that that actually the residents of Larkspur would like to see a different policy and allow some additional businesses, that can be amended just with a vote of 3 members of the council. So it's not locked in stone forever if you adopt the ordinance that's been recommended by the staff.
That was helpful.
Thank you, Sky. Appreciate it. Any other questions?
Not right now, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, Dan?
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I may have a comment.
Okay.
So I'd like to go ahead.
Just to follow up with the city attorney, there's nothing about this that would make it inconsistent with state law.
No.
Question mark.
State, we were trying to figure out a few things.
Just to follow up quickly, there's nothing about the city's proposal that would be not consistent with the state law as it currently stands.
No, absolutely not. As it is right now, state law, particularly the statewide proposition and the statutes that have been enacted by the legislature, very clearly allow local jurisdictions to decide which businesses to allow and which not. It's only the state regulatory agency that has issued regulations that don't reflect that retention of local control, and that's why they're being litigated. As far as I know, that litigation is still pending, and so, but everything that's being proposed tonight is consistent with state law.
Hey, thank you.
Kevin?
Just a further clarification on that, because I'm still a little confused. So if we were to not adopt, I mean, we're not actually adopting this ordinance tonight anyway, it's just introducing it and waiving first reading, so there's still going to be some further process even if we do that.
That's correct.
So it's not like tonight's the last opportunity to have anything to say about any of this stuff. But as I kind of understand, the short of what you're saying is that unless we have an ordinance that affirmatively authorizes, then when the state goes to issue their process, they're going to look at the city of Larkspur and say, well, the city of Larkspur doesn't have anything authorizing that, therefore we're not going to proceed. Is that?
That should be the case. It should be the case that that if a business sought a state permit to open in Larkspur, that the regulatory agency would look at its list and do its due diligence and determine that Larkspur has not expressly allowed that type of business and not issue the permit. What some of us, and I think that the league shares this view, have remained concerned about is in the absence that to restate part of what I said before, and I apologize for the repetition, but if the council didn't move forward with this ordinance and simply let the moratorium expire and took no other action, the prohibition on businesses would basically be the permissive zoning rule, which says that if we don't expressly allow a use, then it's prohibited. So we have, I believe that we have, as part of correspondence with the state, informed them that that is the state of the law in Larkspur, and we would hope that they would honor that. But it would not be as clear to them as something like the ordinance that's before you tonight that very clearly states that the only business that's allowed is delivery where the delivery business is actually located in another city. That would be a very clear expression to them that they should not issue a permit to a business that came seeking to open in Larkspur.
Okay,
That's better clarification.
That's helpful, and the reason I'm asking that question is because I think there has been expressed, at least among by some of the folks appearing here tonight, that maybe we need some more time on this issue, and because it has been a while since we really got into it when we did the moratorium. That was 2 years ago. Whether people's attitudes have changed, I don't know. I kind of doubt it, particularly in light of the fact that other communities around Marin County are taking the same approach that staff is recommending tonight. But I want to be respectful of that concern without necessarily altering the status quo if, in fact, it's the desire of the council to give this a little bit more time. I'm not suggesting we should or shouldn't. I'm just thinking that's an issue that we probably ought to discuss.
Okay.
Okay. So, council members, do you want to add on to what Kevin just said? Okay, Larry, please do.
To me, I don't think there's anything to discuss here. You know, I'm ready to support staff recommendation tonight. I think in large part, you know, everyone keeps coming in here with a statistic saying that 70% of the people have passed and favored Prop 64, but I was on a statewide committee that studied Prop 64 before it came out, and you know, that was Public Safety Committee. We studied a lot of things besides legalization of marijuana, but the vast majority of the people, including myself, wanted to decriminalize the use of marijuana. But when you ask the same person, do you want it sold in your community? And the vast majority of the people said no. And that's effectively what we heard in our last council meeting. So just as a matter of full disclosure, although we didn't get it from all our speakers, I was, from the onset, I was the co-chair of the Twin Cities Coalition for Healthy Youth. So a lot of the things we studied is the impact of alcohol and other drugs on our youth, and that's the reason for restricting its sale around places where youth are most likely to congregate, because the biggest problem with alcohol and other drugs is the issue of access. 600 feet is absurd. You know, I can run that in 30 seconds. You know, we had actually made a recommendation that said a half mile. Now, if you use a half mile, that basically also excludes just about everything in Larkspur. So while some people might consider that extreme, 600 feet is also low, but we'll leave that discussion in case we get to the point where we want to permit it. But in large part, you know, yeah, there's revenue. I don't remember what the taxing percentage was, but if it's around 5%, you got to generate $5 million to get 5%, and that gives you $250,000. Is that the type of money that we want in this community, or can we find $250,000 another way? Because what you also have are the public health issues associated with it, plus enforcement. Because on that committee that we studied, we had Police Chiefs Association come in and basically tell us that the cost of enforcement and things related to the crimes associated with having marijuana sold in your community, plus the additional cash, because they're not allowed to have bank accounts if it's a federally chartered bank, creates other problems. So you have that combined. And if you want one more anecdotal evidence of its access to youth, is that Central Marin Police Chief came into the coalition one time and basically said that there's a hugely disproportionate number of young males who at that time had medical marijuana cards as a proportion of those who are using medical marijuana for pain management. So I would support staff's recommendation irrespective of whether we need to or not, because we typically do things on a permissive zoning methodology, and this sends us a message that says, no, we're not going to permit it.
Okay. So it sounds like Larry wants to make a motion. Anybody else want to add anything for further discussion, to bring this to another?
I appreciate that,
Okay.
Larry. Your perspective, I think, is very important. I was on that committee for a short period of time with you, and I didn't have that opportunity for that discussion, but that was a very, the League's Committee on Public Safety really was very broad in including a lot of shared stakeholders, which was a very important one. I think the CMPA issue is very important for us to recognize, that we work cooperatively with our police and 2 other cities, and we really need to think about whether the impact that we have on our JPA relationship and on our community relationship with our law enforcement, having to try to enforce things within their entity, but different rules and responsibilities. And I don't think that that's really what we need to do for our law enforcement. So I appreciate that perspective.
Okay. Kevin, you want me to comment?
Briefly, again, I just wanted to, my prior comments were only to raise the issue of whether those things were things we would want to discuss. My own personal view, which would be reflected in a vote that we would take on this ordinance, is that my views haven't changed since this first came up, and had we had this ordinance before us at the time we were considering the moratorium, I would have voted for it. So I don't know that there's anything that has occurred in 2 years that changes my perspective about that.
Okay, with that said, do we have a motion? Does anyone want to?
I didn't make a motion, but
I
I
know
can
you
make a
did.
motion to introduce and waive first reading of ordinance, and I forgot the number.
1041.
1041.
All right, may I have a second?
I'll second it. Okay.
Okay, and all in favor?
You beat me to it. Aye.
Aye. Any nays? I see none. Great. I will close public hearing. Thank you.
I just wanted to add for the record, I didn't want to disparage marijuana delivery businesses, and the planning director reminded me we've actually had them inquire how to get a business license, so they are doing the responsible thing.
Yeah, I remember that discussion. Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll go move to 8 business items. 8.1. Designation of municipal advisor and bond counsel to assist with the evaluation of 2 financial matters. So we have 2 different resolutions to pass here. So we'll start with A, refinancing city unfunded accrued liability with the California Public Employees Retirement System. So maybe we have staff update on that one?
Yeah, I'd
Dan?
like to do one staff report for both resolutions, if
Do you?
that's all right
Okay.
with the mayor.
Of course, then please do.
There are 2 separate resolutions because you have an option tonight to consider only authorizing one of the activities, or neither, or both. So we wanted to frame it in a way that empowered you to do that. Also, there's some necessary declarations in there, which is my segue into, there's also a revised staff report that's been issued. I had written one of the sentences rather poorly, not recalling that there are regulations around the municipal advisory world, and I need to be careful sometimes in how I properly describe the work that's being done for the city in this area. So your revised staff report makes an important clarification about what a municipal advisor does. So with that said, the city has an ad hoc committee that comes together with me periodically to discuss different financial issues, and we had reason to ask that ad hoc committee to meet recently, and that's Councilmember Haroff and Vice Mayor Chu. They joined myself and the Administrative Services Director, Kathy Orm, to talk about 2 separate items that are now the items before you. The first is the idea of saving the city money in terms of interest that we're paying on our pension obligation. And essentially, the idea here is that there is an ability to pay through the means of a bond a portion of the obligation that you owe to CalPERS and get that bond at a lower interest rate than what we're essentially paying to PERS, because although PERS wouldn't tell you they have a specific interest rate on your debt, they effectively do, because they have a rate of return that they're expecting to get, the discount rate, which is going to be 7% soon. And they don't always make 7%, and then they charge us for what they didn't actually realize. And also, when they calculate out what that obligation should be, they do the calculation on the basis that they're going to have a 7% return. That effectively builds a 7% interest rate into our debt. And we could go out and finance that debt with a bond and lower that interest rate and capture those savings. This is highly technical analysis that needs to occur, and we also have to find out what the interests in the lending market would be in participating in this type of business arrangement with us. So we need the help of a municipal advisor and a bond counsel to explore and bring you a fully vetted proposal for your assessment. So the first item, the first resolution before you, is to authorize us to commence that work with Wolf Hansen, who's been our longtime municipal advisor, and Quentin Timming has long been the city's bond counsel for the financial arrangements, and we'd like to have a relationship here with them again to explore this idea and bring you a fully vetted proposal. The second matter relates to analyzing our unfunded capital infrastructure needs that we talked about in August. One of the directions from the council was to examine whether or not some assessment is an appropriate way to fund our capital needs. And we need the help of experts from a firm like Wolf Hansen to do that analysis and figure out what those dollars would really look like so that we can engage the public and have a proper conversation with them about what that possible assessment looks like. So we would like to engage their services to advise us and help us crunch some data to bring that kind of analysis back to the council and to the community. So those are the two separate issues, and the reason I combine them in one item is what we're asking is for you to consider authorizing either of those two work programs. And if you authorize one or both of them, I plan on executing the attached master agreement. And the work would all fall under the master agreement that's been attached to your staff report. And that's why we combine them all together under this particular agenda item. There are representatives here from Wolf Hansen. If you have more specific questions about the work to be done, they can come up and answer that for you. But again, this is just to commence the work to provide you with a staff report so that you can make decisions later. Authorizing this work in no way obligates the city to any debt obligation or change to do any of these actions. We just don't have the internal resources to bring that level of analysis to you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Any questions from the council?
Well, not really a question, but just clarification, and it's just essentially a reiteration of what the city manager just said. This is just an initial step that we need to do to evaluate what our options are. We got to get these folks going on it, and as you said, we're not really committing anything in terms of substance about decisions that we would be making at a later point.
That's correct. We believe speculatively that the city could capture significant interest savings, but we need to go out, put a full proposal together, and give you an idea of what that looks like and whether that's something you would like to do.
Yeah. And I'll have a comment about that when it comes back to the council.
Okay. Larry?
I think one of the things, it's kind of like, why now? And it's not about trying to restructure our debt. It's the opportunity right now because we don't get many circumstances in which the long-term interest rate is below that of the short-term interest rate. So the opportunities are here.
And it's worth noting that the Fed took action that's consistent with what we may want to accomplish here today.
That's good insight, too.
So
Catherine?
the fiscal impact, reading in your staff report, would be $1,500 per month until the project is terminated for their fee schedule, and then a portion. Can you explain that to me?
So essentially for item A, there's no immediate fiscal impact because Wolf Hansen typically charges fees if we move to a bond
proceed.
issuance.
Okay.
The second one's a retainer to provide advice and analysis for a possible ballot measure, and it's appropriate there for them to collect some
Yes.
fee to accommodate them for the work they'll be doing.
And that,
But
okay.
it's not both, though. It's either one or the other, isn't it, Dan?
Well, no,
if it
they'd be
goes-
billing us differently for the different sets of work. So,
Okay. All right, any other questions from the council? No? Okay, I'll open it to the public. Anybody from the public like to make a comment or have questions? Come on up, James.
James Holmes, Larkspur. I have two comments largely related to the issue of the unfunded capital proposals. I think it's an excellent idea to go forward with the pension refinancing. But I noticed two aspects of the unfunded capital aspects. One is, and of greatest concern to me, is the scope of work. The scope of work in two places refers to a new city hall or a potential new city hall. It also refers to new fire stations. And I really wonder, I can give you the exact citations if you would like. The language isn't completely the same because in another one of the resolutions, it drops a reference to a new city hall. It says a reconstruction of the city hall, but it then refers to 2 new fire stations. My understanding is that we wanted to rehabilitate the 2 fire stations and the city hall for seismic purposes. I think the idea of replacing our iconic city hall or our iconic fire station is really outside the scope of what anyone has been planning. And so I question whether that should be included. And I wonder if we can narrow the scope of work and then perhaps narrow the amount of the retainer. I'm also saddened to see the inclusion of the library in a public bond issue, because it was my understanding that the library would be privately funded. Now, I do understand the rationale. There has always been a desire to relocate the library and have that space for the rehabilitated, not new, City Hall. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure that the rehabilitations are a need to have. The library is a nice to have, and if you were to combine both of them, I think that could possibly drag it down, because it should be kept in mind there are huge additional number of taxes and of various kinds being proposed. Smart, possibly a fire tax, TAM, BMMWD has an add-on. The sewer and others as well. PG&E is of course increasing its rates. So I'm concerned about bringing the library into the sphere of public finance. Again, I'm concerned about the concept of a new City Hall, a new fire station. I think we should limit the scope and possibly limit the amount of the retainer. And I think that the library should not be publicly funded.
Great, thanks, James. So Dan, it's not new; it's retrofitted, correct, for the City Hall?
So I'd be happy to work with Wolf Hansen to remove the word new where it's causing any consternation. No one is proposing a new City Hall. We're talking about the overhaul that this building needs. I would like to remind the council that the possibility of a new fire station in Greenbrae is something you have discussed. It's not saying that's what will happen, but we have discussed that we have a report from an architect suggesting long-term, that's a better investment for the city.
But the fire station next to City Hall
would not disappear either. It would be rehabilitated.
Right.
So we can play with that verbiage. It won't affect the retainer. I guarantee you, the Wolf Hansen, we didn't instruct them about some gigantic cost for a new building. It's the cost that we've been showing to you as what we think it will take to rehabilitate City Hall. So I don't think this will have any effect on.
Thank you. And then the polling is to ask certain residents of Larkspur what they would
That's the next item.
support. I was just kind of answering James.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, so James is wondering about with put the library on the bond, that there's a concern, and that's the reason we want to have the polling.
Well, I would answer Mr. Holmes differently.
Okay, please do.
The council gave very clear direction that they would like to know what the cost to the public would be if we chose public financing for the library. Analyzing it is the responsible thing for the council to do. Presenting that data to the community is the responsible thing for the city to do. And it in no way obligates us to turn around and do these things, but to not analyze them, I think, was one of the conclusions you had at your workshop. To not analyze them would be an irresponsible thing to do. So we're in no way predetermining what, if anything, will end up on the ballot. We're just trying to analyze all this because you've made it clear you want to consider these options, and your staff has some level of expertise to do some of that work, but we don't have the level of expertise that you and the community need to have that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the public like to make a comment? Cindy?
Cindy Winter. I think I sort of agree with James. I'm confused about precisely what you are thinking about, and if you had a specific list. New fire station on Berry Way. Renovate the fire station on Berry Way, the different costs. Renovate the fire station on Magnolia Avenue. Do this, that, and the other thing to City Hall. Include the library, the new library in it, because that is a major issue, and people need to make make their vote whether they want to do it or not.
So, Madam Mayor, if I may respond.
Absolutely.
That list was presented to the council at an August 14 workshop, and this item is in response to the direction given to the council after community input was taken at that workshop that you wanted these numbers, you wanted this analyzed. So all we're asking now is to have the authorization to hire experts to help us do that analysis. And it's entirely consistent with the list that was presented and vetted to the public on August 14th.
Okay.
And in many other meetings
Yes,
prior.
it's been in many discussions.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll wait to see what eventuates.
Thanks, Cindy. Anyone else?
Just to follow up on that, our CIP, our capital improvement plan, is reported to us as a council regularly. I mean, at least during the budget cycle, we at least see it twice, if I recall right.
And it was
we
done.
right, and then we had another workshop where we had it specifically looking at what our unfunded projects are. So it's a regular process that we go through. Prioritizing them has not necessarily taken place. Am I correct with that?
I completely agree. I also want to add there are other items on that list that we are not proposing be analyzed here as a result of the discussion that occurred on August 14th. So although I agree with you, the full prioritization from 1 to 20 or however many projects there were on that list wasn't done, you elevated these 4 projects and said these are very high priority for us to have information about.
Right.
The other, I think, glaring one that Vice Mayor Chu reminded me about is the storm drain system, but we're going to be bringing you a master plan and talking about some other possible options for financing that problem.
But the 4 we're talking about would be City Hall, the 2 fire stations, and supporting the...
Whatever's to happen at the Rose Lane property.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, I will close public comment, come back to the council. Any more questions or discussion from the council?
I think it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, may I have motions for the 2 resolutions? We got 2 of them.
We probably have to take them one at a time, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely.
So I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 5719.
All right, may I have a second?
Second.
All right, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? I see none. Now we have Resolution 5819. May I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Did we have public discussion on the second business item?
We're not
Oh.
there yet.
We're not there yet.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're still doing 8.1. No worries. Resolution 5819, may I have a motion for that, please?
I think we have a motion, and I'll be happy to second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? I see none. Great, thank you. So now we'll move on to 8.2. Update on community facility parcel procedures and granting a budget authority for assessing community support for publicly financed project options. So may we please have an update?
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
They sat for a long time and didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good night.
Yeah.
We've worked with them before.
Great presentation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so turning to agenda item 8.2, when the August 14 workshop on unfunded infrastructure concluded, you'll recall we had a specific discussion about the Rose Lane property and the library in particular, and you heard a presentation from the Larkspur Library and Community Center Foundation discussing their finding that there's an expectation among the donor base that there be some level of public financing that occurs with that project. So in discussing that and combining that piece of information from the foundation with what you had heard throughout the evening about the different unfunded projects, you asked us to explore the potential to publicly finance the 4 buildings, the 3 that exist that need to be either rehabilitated or, in the case of the Green Bay Station, potentially replaced.
Mhm.
So that's City Hall, that's the fire station next door, and that's the fire station out in Green Bay. And then whatever building is to be constructed as to be the library on the Rose Lane property. And so one of the things we said to you is we probably are going to need to engage the public in a variety of ways. We first need to kind of get a sense of how well the public understands the situation. We probably need to start doing some engagement and outreach and explaining the situation to folks. And then more specifically, as we do the work that you just approved with Wolf Hansen, we need to start to talk to the community about their comfort with any public financing and what it would cost to individual property owners. This is a specialty. It's a specialty that's beyond the skill of the staff to do in a way that would bring you and the community the type of information you need to make these decisions. We've gone through these exercises before on other issues, most notably our 2 measures that were mostly directed toward funding our road system. And as the council knows from those past experiences, it's a very dynamic process where essentially we retain an advisor to help us in terms of doing the community engagement and sort of deciphering what we're hearing from the community, whether it's in public forums, whether it's in one-on-one meetings, whether it's in polling. And then in addition, commissioning additional follow-up procedures, whether that again is facilitated engagement, maybe it's a second poll. So it becomes a very dynamic process. And so the system that's worked well for us is for you to give me some general parameters to budget authority that allows me to engage these contracts, because all of these contracts individually fall within my spending authority. But I think it's important to disclose to the public that you've granted me an amount of budget authority that's in excess of my typical spending authority. So that's essentially what I'm asking for here. In the past, the numbers have been $125,000 for the 2 measures. I never spent anywhere near that figure, but it gave me and my staff the comfort to know we could work through these processes in an expeditious manner. So in this case, I've asked for a little bit more spending authority because I think the level of engagement is going to be more robust here. We have 4 different assets in play to talk about with the community, and we have a lot of issues to talk about with the community. And so I'm asking for a little bit more budget authority to commission this type of work. Now, I also provide in the staff report, you actually directed us to work on 4 different categories of engagement in terms of how to resolve the issue with the community facility parcel, the property at Rose Lane, and how we might realize a library and or some public asset on that property. So I wanted to update you now, which I did in the written report, and that gives a little more context to the requests that I'm making this evening. Our partner on attempting to realize a library on the property is the Larkspur Library and Community Center Foundation, which has raised the money and is continuing to raise the money to pay for an architect to do a design for the facility. We've been discussing with them sort of making that work in a way that we would possibly have a structure approximately 12,500 square feet with the potential to grow, because we think that scales consistent with the master plan you adopted and also something that's achievable budget-wise. And so that's something we will need to explore, both by getting an architect on board through an RFP process to see what that might look like, but also that's what we need to start communicating to the public. We're thinking about getting a facility on the property that costs roughly this. And we need to talk to you as a community about how we're going to pay for it and how it might be publicly financed in some way, shape, or form. The other path that you asked us to go down was to find out if the development community would be interested in doing some level of mixed use on the property that would allow us to have a facility there. And by mixed use here, we're talking most likely about housing being mixed with public use. And so for that process, we had recommended that we issue what's called an RFQ, a request for qualifications. It's more of an open-ended expression to the development community. Let us know if you have ideas, and if you do, put them down on paper so we can take a look. And if we find it interesting, we'd like to have a conversation with you. So we're initiating that process as well. And both those processes are being set up so that in early 2020, the council will have the responses to review and consider if they want to move forward with them. Then you also asked us to come back with you being empowered to know whether a public financing structure is the right way to go, both for that project, and then you also asked us to look at those other 3 projects. That's this part of the request tonight, is to give me the budget authority to get these resources, to get those answers for you. And lastly, the one we haven't really started exploring as a staff is talking to our potential public partners about whether they have resources that would be available. We plan to start doing that work, want to get these other things moving before we do that. That's something we can do once the RFP and the RFQ are out the door and spending their time out in the universe being digested. We can then engage our partners in those conversations. Frankly, they'll want to see, I suspect, what some of those responses are too before they totally know what they're possibly going to be committing to. So all of that's in motion, but to really bring you and the community the type of information you need about public financing, I need some level of budget authority to commission contracts.
And Dean, what about county, working with the county? Is that an option maybe?
Well, that would be one of our potential public partners as
Okay.
the county. We mentioned that the county is obviously one because they run libraries as well.
Mhm.
And then we have our 2 school districts, our potential partners. They both run libraries too. And frankly, there are other cities nearby that we should be talking to that run libraries as well. So we should reach out to all of them.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Any questions from the council?
I just want one question, and again, this is the beginning of a process, and the process involves consideration of different ways to possibly fund, in the library's case, a library on the new parcel. Not necessarily a 20,000 square foot building, but whatever it is that we think that the public can support for us to do. And it may be that, once we go through all of these processes that we've talked about and are considering and will evaluate, it may be that the public won't support some of these things. And we don't want to foreclose the opportunity for a developer for coming in or through private some effort that's doesn't necessarily involve the city expenditure of funds to actually construct something there. So we're not shutting any doors on anything.
Right.
We're not trying to set this up for failure. We're trying to set this up for success. But we need to go through this process, as I understand it, in the way that you've articulated it, if we're going to have any chance of succeeding with public funding component to what we're trying to do.
It's nice to have options, and that's what you're offering.
Options to
discussion.
give you the most information. One thing I sometimes have told you in other public meetings, and it's kind of good to refresh about, is each of you have a universe of influence and a universe of folks that contact you on a fairly regular basis and tell you how they feel about different issues. And some of you, those universes cross in different ways, and some of you have your own folks giving you input. Same with me. Same with all of your staff. We all have these folks that are telling us different things. We put information out into the community in a variety of ways, and we engage the community as much as we can in a variety of different ways. What I've learned through going through these processes where you bring in these folks who are experts in engagement is you need to do all of it, and then you need to look at it holistically to really understand what your whole community is thinking, because what they help you do is get the opinion of folks we aren't hearing from.
Right.
You know, the folks that don't get animated unless it directly affects their property, or the folks who lead lives that don't really allow them to engage any of us, but they vote. And so we need to know what they think too.
So, go ahead, Dan.
Just a quick question on the item before us is simply to grant you or not grant you that funding authority. We're not talking about any of the, well, we can discuss anything we want, but our objective here is to just take this funding or step to give you the resources you need to look at previously directed tasks.
Yes, and I've specifically suggested I'd be pulling this out of the reserve, which has the capacity to provide this funding.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Dan, you're talking about engaging with the Lou Edwards group again.
I only reminded the council we have a relationship with them. I haven't had a chance to
All right.
even ask them if this is something they can fit into their work program.
Okay.
You know, one thing I'll let you know is I suspect whether it's them or another firm that specializes in this, they are probably all quite busy because if you were, for example, inclined to be on the 2020 November ballot, you're probably too late. All these folks have probably been working on that ballot for 6 months already.
Mm-hmm.
And they're probably very busy because presidential elections tend to be the ones where their services are in the highest demand. So that may mean we have to get in line and work with them best we can on our timetable.
Right, but that said, we're trying really hard.
Trying really
here.
hard to just give
Yeah.
me the ability to go do that.
We want you to
Yeah.
have the ability to go do that. We're not trying to defer decision making. We're trying to be thoughtful about our decision making process, and this is the way that we have to be thoughtful in order to get a good outcome.
That's right.
Great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open to the public. Any public comment regarding 8.2?
Jean Friedel, 358 Larkspur Plaza, and also a member of the LLCCF. First, I wanted to acknowledge Mayor Morrison and Councilmember Haroff, as well as City Manager Dan Schwartz, for working with the task force that we have met now for a year, I believe, every month, discussing this process. And I really want to thank you all for looking at the at least 4 funding ways, if not 5 funding ways, to get this library built. And I would urge you to continue to look at all 4 of those revenue streams and funding opportunities simultaneously so that the city can be presented with multiple opportunities and ways to fund this, and that the community can weigh in versus, I understand that 8.2 is granting powers to really look at the bond issue, and I respect that as one of the opportunities. Ultimately, I think this process is going to come down to some sort of combined project amongst all those 4 fundings so we can get this project made. And LLCCF is committed. I mean, we've been working tirelessly. We've raised almost $250,000 to keep the process going. So I would urge you all to continue to do that. And again, thank you to the 3 of you who served with us on this task force for the last year.
Yeah. Well, and Jean, thank you, and the LLCCF. You guys have been just incredible and very patient and knowledgeable. So thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I see. Oh.
It's a race to be last. It's a race.
Come on up.
Race to be last.
Okay, well. Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
All right.
We can.
Hi, I'm Carol Schrumpf. I live at 61 Chanticleer, and I wrote you all an email, but too late to be included in the packet. So it's, perhaps you'll get it tomorrow. I just wanted to voice my support for construction of a library on the parcel at Rose Lane. And I think I was told by Joe that to just renovate the existing library would be extremely expensive. And the library in this building is small, and is not really conducive to community meetings and things like that. And I think, I know places like Tiburon, the library is a real community center, and it would be wonderful for Larkspur to be able to have such a thing as well. And I think I attended a meeting that Joe and Barbara Friday put together, and people were very enthusiastic about backing the construction of a new library on the Rose Lane property.
Right.
And I think if there's a lot of dawdling and we could do this, we could do that, or maybe we shouldn't do it, or it's too expensive, or it's this, or it's that, or we want a yellow one or a green one, and people
That's why we have this resolution.
Yeah, I
Well-
think the opportunity may just disappear. So I would urge that there be some action and that the library be included
as one of the projects to be considered for bond funding, and that there be a public-private partnership. And I think I've said what's.
Thank
what I
you.
have to say.
And
Thank
your
you.
letter is in here. Our
It is
city
not.
manager and city clerk.
It's on the dais. We
Yeah.
got in time to
you
give
did
it
get
to
it.
you.
We are good. Yes, these guys know what they're doing.
All right, well, thank you. Please pardon my tardiness.
No worries.
Sometimes, okay, thank you.
We're happy you suggested.
Hello, I'm Joan Foley, 42 Loma Vista Avenue. I just wanted to speak in favor of funding the assessment for the support of the community center and library facility. I think, as we know, this has been a long road, and there's been a lot of misinformation out there. And I think the hope is that this will bring people together, and again, the information will come forward in a kind of an organized fashion that we've been hoping for. And now with a very strong private group that is behind us, I think we can finally gain the momentum we've all been hoping for. So I'm in great favor of this.
Great. Thanks, Joan. Nice to see you. James?
James Holmes, Larkspur. As a technical matter, the resolution does state in its first whereas, including rehabilitation or replacement of the city's two fire stations. So I would suggest that you might want to correct that, given the council's apparent consensus that at least one of them does not have to be replaced. I just think that $150,000 is a lot of money to drop on this at the outset, and I just would have liked to have seen perhaps a little bit less money and a little bit more specific tasks for the money to be used for. With regard to community engagement, I don't know where you could get any better community engagement than the five of you on the dais, because we have literally decades of community engagement here. And so I would think that in and of itself might be able to reduce the $150,000 considerably. And you got, with regard to one proposal, you got some very, very incisive community engagement just the last couple of days from a former city council member, and I'm almost certain that is almost the last word on that. So I'm so often the city stresses its financial constraints that it's just a little bit surprising to see the $150,000 being proposed for this, so that I would hope that at a minimum as little as possible would be spent for tasks as specific as possible, and every effort would be made to utilize free sources of
Yes. Thanks, James. Our city manager is very frugal with our spending, so I don't.
I actually was remiss in noting that the resolution does require me to confer with an ad hoc committee of the council before I spend the money. And I was going to propose that the two members that are engaging the Larkspur Library and Community Center Foundation are probably the logical folks to serve as that ad hoc committee. That will sadly have to change, and couple months here, but that would be a natural ad hoc committee, in my opinion. But that's a check and balance as well as the city attorney, because I don't normally ask for such blind discretion. And maybe to clarify for Mr. Holmes and the public before I pass it back to you, part of the problem is the time-sensitive issues that come up with this type of work. For example, if we commission a poll, sometimes the first poll doesn't get us everything we need. And so when we talk about how quickly can we be out in the field to get more information, and it's not prudent to keep bringing those tasks to the whole council and getting the contracts approved. It's easier to work through an ad hoc committee and the city attorney to do those in time-sensitive fashion if that's the type of information we need. Now, I'd like to pride myself. I think I've always canceled most of the work once I felt we had enough information that we understood. And we usually structure these agreements on tasks. We can cancel them after each task because sometimes we reach a point we do feel we understand pretty strongly what the community is telling us, and we don't need the services of the consultants anymore.
Dan, do we need to add ad hoc onto this resolution?
It's in the resolution.
Oh, sorry.
I actually would suggest you may
there it
want to
is.
make
There
a
it
separate
is.
motion who the ad hoc committee is.
Should we wait till the two new members are on
You could do
board?
that too. I
that's what I
don't imagine, but it's possible I might need an initial contract before
Okay.
they're seated. So maybe you might want to at least make a motion, if you concur with my recommendation, that the mayor and Councilmember Haroff be the ad hoc committee in October and November to.
With an alternate if you need it.
There you go. Okay.
And if that is the wish of the council, I will be happy to accept the challenge and also to gracefully step down if circumstances warrant it in the future.
Okay. So, any other questions?
Only at
for
the right
staff?
time, I'll make the motion to accept the staff recommendation and include the designation of the two council members referred to by the city manager as the ad hoc committee for this item.
Okay, that's a motion, right, Dan? All right. But Dan, are you including Resolution 5919 or just the ad hoc? I guess it's just the ad hoc,
No,
isn't it?
well, the staff recommendation is to approve Resolution 5919.
Okay.
So,
All right. So may I have a second, please?
A second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? I see none. It passes. Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. With that, number 9 says we adjourn, and our next meeting is October the 2nd. All right. So thank you, everybody, for coming and staying and all your comments. Appreciate it.